What a bitch. What's up, everybody? It's that anime show Halloween special. I am your host for this evening, Miss Terri Doty. Hello. Hi. How you doing? I have no J. Michael Tatum with me today, but he made sure to record personal accounts of paranormal activity, tell us what he loves about Halloween and all that loveliness, so don't worry, we've got the Tatum front covered. Let me see. Now, originally, I had this idea along brainstorming one night with Stephen and Tatum talking about doing a Halloween special, and the original idea was to do just a paranormal themed thing, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own. We've got Stephanie Young and her husband doing a reading of an axe murderer story. We've got Todd doing what he loves to do, which is awesome sauce personified. And we've got personal accounts of paranormal activity, as well as just creepy stories, not necessarily paranormal, but still really good. And I just couldn't bring myself to go, well, hey, that's not a ghost story because it's Halloween. Fuck it. You've got zombies, you've got werewolves, mummies. Why not spice it up a bit and not just limit it to ghosts? Well, let's go ahead and just jump right into it. What do you say? Our first story is from the lovely, talented J. Michael Tatum. It's uber creepy, really funky. Let's have a listen.
All right, so this is my own personal ghost story. I happen to have a lot of them, as it turns out, or what I call ghost stories. I just prefer to refer to them as being unexplained, because I don't know what a ghost is, but but this is probably one of my best, and that it was one of the freakiest. When I grew up, actually, in a relatively small Texas town, it has long since been developed, but at the time it was bordered to the north by wilderness for the most part. And when I was in my late teens, a group of friends and I discovered, by sheer chance, this abandoned cabin out in the middle of the woods. It was really miles and miles away from where any of us lived at the time. In fact, you couldn't get there by car. You had to park on this lonely dirt road off to the side and then schlep by foot more than a third of the way there. I don't remember which one of our group found it first, but it became sort of our little secret. There was about a dozen of us that knew about this place. It had been deserted for a long time, and it was a really neat little building. It was this sort of squat, split-level pier and beam place. It looked like it was relatively modern, like it had maybe been built in the 40s or 50s or something like that, although it had never been equipped, as far as we could tell, for electricity or running water. There was like a pump out back, or a old pump well out back, rather. And it just had like a Murphy bed and some basic furniture, and the best part, shelves and shelves of books. Like every wall in this place was just covered with books. Whoever had lived there before had been mad for like anthropology and history and all this, and so books of all that kind of stuff were everywhere. Now, we found it and we fell in love with this place. It became kind of our hideaway. We spent a lot of time out there. Unfortunately, vandals discovered it years before we did and had really done a number on the place. So we thought it would be a great idea if we cleaned it up. And actually, over the course of a summer, this group of friends and I dedicated ourselves to going out there, mostly on the weekends, and sprucing it up. You know, nothing dramatic, but, you know, we gave it like a fresh coat of paint, and we organized the books, cleaned up, would kind of do some landscaping, you know, nothing major, just out of just sheer love for this tucked away abandoned cabin or cottage or whatever you want to call it. We tried to do some research as to who owned it before, but that never really came to anything. It was just this bizarre little thing in the middle of the woods. Well, one night we went out there to spend the night. It was about, I guess there's maybe 8 or 9 of us. And we'd always bring lanterns and searchlights and things like that, you know, basically camping gear with us. And we were just out on this back patio area talking and, you know, chatting and whatnot. And after a while, we became very gradually aware of this very unusual, very unsettling noise coming from the woods. The best way to describe it would be to say it sounded like a cross between some sort of animal, like a wildcat or something, screaming. If you've ever heard one of those, it's a very, frightening noise, mixed with what we started thinking sounded like a person yelling in pain. I mean, there was nothing being articulated. There was no words, but it was just this very odd, and we couldn't tell how far away it was. It was way, way back in the woods, is all we could tell you, and it was coming at pretty consistent intervals, so it almost sounded mechanical. It's very, very strange, and we couldn't figure out. All of us had grown up near woods and hiking and camping all our lives, and we'd never heard sounds like this before. And after a while, we became convinced that this was a person. This had to be someone back in the woods that was either lost or hurt or trapped. Maybe someone had fallen down an old well or something. Who knows? So we decided, a couple of us, about 4 of us actually, decided to get some lights and to go into the woods and see if we could find where this noise was coming from, just in case it really was a person that needed help. Now, mind you, this was in the days before cell phones. No one, our parents didn't know where we were, didn't know where this cabin was. It was totally our little secret. So we were totally isolated out here with nothing but just each other. And about 4 of us stay behind in the cabin, and 4 of us go into the woods with like a couple of lanterns and some flashlights and stuff. And as we go into the woods, we're calling out to this noise, which, it's being dark. We can't tell where it's coming from or even how far away it is. But it's not really answering us. I mean, the noise is still happening, but it's not changing any when we say, hey, can you tell us where you are? Are you hurt? That kind of stuff. It was just really strange. And after, I guess we gotten far enough into the woods that we really couldn't see the cabin behind us anymore, and we noticed that the noise began shifting its position. It began moving, or at least sounding as though it were moving, like sort of clockwise to the right of us where we were. And we thought, okay, that's really, really weird. And we thought, well, maybe that's just, an auditory illusion because we're getting closer to where it is or something, and we're just sort of off track. We didn't know, but it was beginning to get a little freaky and whatever. And after a few moments of that, we also noticed the sound started being answered by a similar sound, actually an identical sound, coming from off to the left of us. And we stood there for a while listening to these 2 creatures, or whatever you want to call them, sort of calling back and forth, and we became aware that they were kind of forming a circle around us, or at least felt like they were going to. And then all it took was for one of us to say, "Oh my God, dude, that sounds like we're being hunted, and like they're circling for us in ambush." And so we're like, "Okay, to hell with this." And so we got out of the woods as quick as we could and went back to the cabin and told everybody. Now the weird thing is, everyone had stayed back at the cabin had never heard more than one noise. They never heard 2 noises going back and forth. They just heard the one. And when we came back out of the woods to the cabin, the sound again resolved itself into just one sound. Again, this sort of screeching, moaning, weird noise that we never could figure out what it was. And needless to say, we were freaked out enough that we hiked back to our cars and left that night, even though by then it was probably 1 o'clock in the morning, because we just didn't want to stay out there that night after hearing that noise. And as a matter of fact, we never stayed the night out there again. And I don't know what's become of that cabin since then, but fast forward about 3 years from that incident, and a friend of mine lived out about, let's say 20 or 30 miles to the east of where this cottage had been. So quite a distance. We headed out there one evening after work. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And his dad, he lived with his parents, his dad, who was an ex-Green Beret, I should note, was sitting at 2 o'clock in the morning on a lawn chair out in the backyard, on the driveway rather, with a gun and like a big searchlight just kind of sitting there, like keeping watch. And we pulled up and asked him, well, that's unusual to see you out. Is everything okay? And all he would tell us was, you boys don't go out in those woods, do you? And we're like, well, no, we don't. We don't do that. He said, good, don't. Not tonight anyway. And that's all he would say. So we kind of, we kind of, whatever, shrugged it off and thought, okay, well, maybe some people try to break in or something. I mean, it's weird. Who knows? Well, the next morning we actually got the story out of his dad. With, I guess daylight, he was more comfortable telling it. Turns out, He'd been out there earlier in the evening by himself, working on a car or in the yard or something, and had heard this noise coming from the woods near their house that he described as sounding like a cross between a wounded animal, like a cougar or a bobcat or something, and a person, yelling. And he said he'd never heard anything like this before in his life. Mind you, this is a man who'd spent time in jungles and all over the world as a Green Beret, and yet here was a noise in his own backyard virtually that he could not pinpoint. He thought it was a person. After a while, he became convinced the only explanation is someone has fallen down a well back there or hurt themselves or is lost. So he went and got a light and his gun, of course, and hiked back into the woods to see if he could find it. And after a little while, he heard two noises calling back and forth to each other on either side of him, about maybe 20 yards from where he was standing, and then beginning to form a circle around him as though waiting in ambush. And he had the exact same feeling as we all did years before, and of course, schlepped the hell out of there and just kept watch on the driveway with his gun for the rest of the night, convinced that, whatever the hell it was not going to get any closer. And it didn't. I mean, he said the sound eventually just went away, but he never figured out what that was. And as far as I know, he never heard it again. I never heard it again. But yeah, weird. That's my story. And I'd love to go back out there at one point and see if I could find that old cabin again, but I'm not really sure that I have the courage to do it.
He doesn't have the courage to do it. He would totally chicken out. I'm such an ass. Sorry. It's one of my favorite stories. I begged him to tell that one because I just love it. No matter how many times he tells it, even though every time he tells the story, we go, we heard it, and he does not care. Well, okay. Between stories, I've decided to do this little funky thing where people tell us little snippets about Halloweens that have passed. We had Jamie Marchi and her brother Jean-Luc Hester on together, and this is midway through. We're talking about costumes, and Jamie's talking about one of her least favorite shining moments in Halloween history.
Let's see, favorite. Well, okay, I'll tell you what my least favorite was.
Yeah.
Because growing up, Mom always wanted the easy way out. So every fucking year, I went as a freaking gypsy. Every year. It was like, here's some fabric. I'm going to drape you in it. You're a gypsy. Now you can jingle.
Look at that. Oh.
Which would have been fine a couple of times. But I'm not kidding you. 6 or 7 years in a row, I was a gypsy. Every year.
I was never a gypsy.
No.
I don't think I was ever a gypsy, but I do recall several Halloweens where it was like, hey, guess what? You're going to be a lawyer. And really what it is you just dress in your parents' clothes and they call it a costume, which is complete bullshit. Just if you're a young parent out there, don't ever do that to your kid because they will hate you for it. I mean, not like I hate you, I want to move out, hate you, but there will be a deep resentment as much as I have for my family. I mean, there's been a good Halloween here or there, but you always remember the bad ones much better than you do the good ones, trust me. Next up, we have the moderator of the That Anime Show chat room, as well as the engineer, Mr. Stephen Hoff.
Okay, so the ghost story that I'm going to be telling is something that happened to me. It's actually a couple of them. When I first moved out of my parents' house shortly after high school, I found an ad in the paper for a house for rent, and called them and talked to the lady and went to go check out the house. And the house that I looked at turned out to be just a single 1-bedroom, one bath efficiency apartment on stilts over a pond. And this one wasn't haunted, but the one down the road, one of the other ones that she rented out was. It was probably about 100 yards away. It was on 40 acres of land out in the middle of nowhere. And it was just me, that other house, and my landlady's house. So it was just 3 houses, on this quote-unquote little dead-end street. And it used to be a catfish farm, so there was all these ponds everywhere that were dried out and empty and, just places to run around and play around out in the country. About a year or so later, I decided to go ahead and rent the other house that she had open because I needed some more room for band equipment and more music gear and everything. So talked to her and arranged a price and moved in there. When I moved in there, I started putting stuff up, and the first time that I kind of knew something was off was when I was putting dishes up. The cabinet door opened by itself, as if it was to help me put the dishes up. Didn't think anything of it. I thanked it and went on my merry little way. Later on, I talked to my landlady and told her that I thought the house was haunted. And she told me later that through several weeks of talking about it, that the land used to be a Indian camping ground, and that apparently that might be part of why it would be haunted. So I don't know, but later on, a few months later, year or so passed with some strange things, just kind of bumps going on in the night, stuff being moved around. My bandmates came over and we for a band practice, and it was me, another keyboard player, and another keyboard player. And at the time, we had some older gear that was kind of iffy anyway. And we got on somehow we got on the subject of ghosts and everything, and one of my bandmates went off about the ghost, saying, this place isn't fucking haunted, fuck you, ghost, blah blah blah. And I was like, dude, don't fuck with the ghost, because he'll do something to you, he'll screw something up. And as soon as he said that, his keyboard shut off, and everything that he had in there, all our songs, were gone. They were all erased. And my other bandmate at that time was using my amplifier, and he had a theremin. For those of you who don't know what a theremin is, it's a box with a pole sticking straight up and a pole sticking straight out, so it kind of forms an L shape, and it uses your biomagnetic field to create sound. And he was using that to, through my amplifier. And he went off on the ghost saying, oh, fuck you, you fucking ruined everything, blah, blah, blah. And then, just completely fucking went off on the ghost. And as soon as he did that, the theremin just started making this low-end rumble and just started squealing really high, and it blew my amp. Smoke everywhere and everything. So within a matter of 5 minutes, those two guys just completely shut down. So we had to call it, quits on the band practice for that night. So yeah, that was kind of the big kicker on that. There's just some, still some creepy feelings here and there, and, doors shutting, electrical stuff just kind of fucking up here and there throughout the time. And I would talk to the ghost and just kind of thank it and leave it little presents here and there to keep it from fucking with my stuff.
Awesome story, am I right? All right, up next we have a bit of the history of the Jamie Marchi, as well as her brother and fellow voice actor Jean-Luc Hester.
Happy Halloween!
Hey guys, how's it going?
So, we're here to talk about our parents' house. They live in a little town,
Just a little northwest of Oklahoma City.
Yes.
Piedmont,
Oklahoma. And it's they live on about 2.5 acres, and everybody over there has between 2.5 or 5 acres, something like that. So
Yeah.
The next door neighbor is pretty far away, and they've lived there for 25 years.
25? Yeah, that's about right, I guess.
Something close to 25
Yeah.
years. When they first moved into the house, though, it had been vacant for 4 years. And it was built in the early 80s, I guess. But it had been vacant, and it had originally been built by a family who ran out of money, so they couldn't finish it with contractors. They had to do it themselves. So for the longest time, the windows didn't fit right.
Yeah, no, there's a lot.
The doors were crooked, and so there were drafts anyway. And, you'd look at the window, and the curtains would be blowing, and the window would be shut.
Yeah, no, there's several winters that duct tape was just all around.
Yeah, my dad is a huge fan of duct tape. Huge. And he also believes that all windows should be covered up because that will help save electricity.
Yes.
Even in the winter. So everything is always covered up. So the house is pretty dark.
Yeah.
They have a lot of crap. I mean...
No, just... Yeah. Stuff.
A lot of stuff.
Needless.
In their living room, which is a pretty good-sized living room, they still have 3 couches, 2 ottomans, and 2 chairs, and a piano. And it's all sandwiched in there. So it's kind of, you've always had to kind of dodge to get out of the way of things. And I used to make my dad mad when I was younger because I would move stuff around and he would trip in the dark because he'd have his path. But the funny thing, awful thing actually, when we first moved in was they, because it had been vacant for such a long time, there was a huge spider problem. So there would be fiddlebacks or brown recluse spiders, depending upon where you're from, is how you say it. They would be the size of your hand, like an adult hand. They were huge and like morphed and super all-powerful, working in teams to try to take you down. They were horrible.
Yeah, no, and I mean, they had, luckily the spider problem's gone down a little bit, but like, they had spider problems, up until I left. It was bad, which I can't believe I never got bit, but...
Yeah, almost the rest of us all had.
Yeah, everyone else did. Lucky.
It was awful. It was so awful. But still, yeah, like, because they have so much stuff, too, it's great hiding places for spiders. Yeah. And the house, I think, just attracts spiders anyway, and I don't like them. I can't imagine why.
Houses?
Spiders. I'm fine with houses. Okay. I don't like yard work.
Makes sense.
So, recently, I stayed at my parents' house. I was in town visiting. And as I come around, they have kind of a courtyard entrance to the house. So as I come around the edge to go into this courtyard, they also have a balcony that hangs over the front door. From the balcony to just over my head, no less than 20 spiders had built giant webs. Huge, colorful, probably cool to people who enjoy spiders all over the place.
And the worst part is sometimes they don't always turn on the outside lights, so you're just kind of walking blindly into a sea of webbing.
Yeah, and my dad didn't really pay attention, so he was, I was like, Dad, there's spider everywhere. There's everywhere. Ah! And he's like, What are you talking about? I thought it was just webs. No, they had spiders in them. Giant, fang-ridden spider. It was horrible. And then, I was like, just open the door, and I ducked and ran, thinking one of those guys was going to fall on me. And that doesn't even mention the tree that's right there. Who knows how many of those little bastards were in that? Ugh, it was horrible. And the next night, I came home by myself. My dad was already there, and he's hard of hearing. And I thought to myself, hard of hearing, he's deaf. He actually has a cochlear implant. Yeah. And that he takes out when he goes to bed. So I'm out there in the country thinking to myself, if I scream, nobody's going to hear me.
Yeah, because it's out there.
I'm all by myself. And, there's coyotes and, it's kind of a creepy house anyway. So that kind of sets the mood and the tone for what the house is itself. Yeah. It's a beast, this house is. But specifically growing up, there was a lot of weird things that happened upstairs. Yeah. And the way that my parents' house is, it's 3 beds, 2 baths, giant living room, dining room, and kitchen. And above all of the bedrooms and the bathrooms,
you have the upstairs. Like just one massive
huge room. It has a closet. It has
a bathroom, and then on the other side of that bathroom, it leads to the attic.
To the attic, yes.
Which goes above the garage.
Mm-hmm. And then there is also a balcony.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't stand out on.
I mean,
I wouldn't think.
Yeah, there's some boards that have holes in them now. I mean,
I'm not going to go out.
Well, you shouldn't. It's not safe.
No. So that room in particular, it was creepy. You would be up there and you'd kind of feel the temperature is different because it's upstairs, but it also has kind of a different. Like the air is thicker.
It's thicker, yeah. It's a little unnerving.
Yeah, there's a different smell, and that smell has always been there. No matter what's been up there, that smell has always been there. So
mold.
Growing up there, because I moved there when I was young, you could hear people upstairs just moving around, and there's nobody there. When we used to have a TV up there, and sometimes my brother and I would go up there, but I honestly don't ever remember hanging out up there very often.
Yeah.
Because it freaked me out. And my parents, though, were convinced that my older brother and I were sneaking upstairs at night to watch TV because they could hear voices like a television being watched, and they could hear the creaking of somebody moving around upstairs. So my dad would sneak around and crawl up the stairs, hearing the whole time. And when he'd get up there wouldn't be anybody up there. The lights would be off. The television would be off. So they took the television out of upstairs, and they still heard it. So that was always kind of odd. Even recently, I was writing a script at my parents' house, and I had to tell whatever it was to shut up because it was freaking me out.
Well, I mean, I had a friend of mine whose sister watched the house when we went out of town for vacation, and I remember her calling Mom and saying, "Hey, is it cool if I have a friend or somebody come over? I'm hearing it sounds like there's someone upstairs. I don't know." She called really freaked out, and Mom was like, "Yeah, that's fine. Have whoever you want over to the house. It's fine." And she told her not to worry about it, that sometimes it happens.
You just hear things.
Yes, no big deal.
And the animals. The cats are okay up there, but they will come tearing down sometimes. And then the dogs normally didn't go up there.
Yeah.
They would just kind of look up the stairs.
Yeah.
So recently, I guess it's been within the past couple of years, this was probably one of the bigger things that unnerved us. We were set on helping my parents clean out their house. They are what they refer to as collectors.
You've all seen hoarders.
Yeah, you've seen hoarders. They're on the verge. They're on the verge.
I like to think that we helped them.
We did.
Out of that situation.
And I say to hoarders, the easiest way to get them to deal with it is to break everything.
Yeah, just throw it all.
Break it, and then they have to get rid of it. Haha. So we had been cleaning out the upstairs, which had turned, you know how like if you have a kitchen, you have a junk drawer? That was their junk room. So everything they didn't know what to do with, they put upstairs. So we had gone through, there was like this hockey table, and there was just a whole bunch of stuff that we had gone through and cleaned out about half of the room. No, we didn't even get into the attic. I wouldn't get into the attic.
No,
I mean, too many potentials for spiders.
Right?
Real live things, much less whatever makes that noises. So clean whatever, go to bed, and my mom wakes us up at 6 o'clock in the morning saying, "Why is your alarm going off?" And we're like, "What are you talking about? There's no alarm."
Yeah, I mean, it was 6 in the morning. We had been working hard the day before, and I was just so zonked out. I was so tired. Yeah. She woke me up.
Yeah. And you said, you were like, "It's coming from upstairs," so you went.
Yeah, no, I went ahead and I ran upstairs, and some of the stuff up there, for a period of time I had lived upstairs, and it was my old alarm clock.
How was living up there?
It was creepy. I had a TV and everything, a little video game system or whatever, but it was creepy. I felt like you were being watched. I used to leave the bathroom light on and close the door, and I stopped doing that. Because I would look over at night and I'd see shadows moving underneath the bathroom door upstairs. like I thought it looked like someone was in there moving around.
Yeah.
And it would freak me out because, I mean, no one had come up the stairs.
Nobody was in the bathroom.
Yeah, it was really creepy. It was just a very unnerving place to be.
Yeah. Like, I still can't believe you went up there.
Yeah, I mean...
I would never have lived up
there. Well,
it
was the biggest space in the room, and I was young, and...
Yeah, it's a huge room. It'd been really cool if it wasn't freaky.
Yeah.
So, okay, sorry. We digress. So, alarm is going off.
Yeah, I walked upstairs, and I went to a table that was in the middle of the room. We hadn't even touched this stuff on that table yet. And, I went over to it, and there was beeping coming from it, and I was like, what the hell? And I, like, pushed stuff over, and, like, I moved stuff out of the way, and I found this old alarm clock, and it was blinking at me, and it was going off, and I was like, what the hell? And, I mean, I was tired, like, I just woken up, I just got my glasses on, and, I was trying to fumble to figure out, turn it off.
And it was loud.
Yeah, it was so loud. Oh, God.
Like, awful loud.
Yeah, and I tried turning it off, and I couldn't figure out how to turn it off, so I was like, I'll just, screw it, I'll just unplug it. So I took the cord and followed the cord until there was, the plug in my hand. It was not, however, plugged in. Yeah, no, it was really, and I didn't, at the time I didn't think about it. Like, I picked it up and started walking downstairs, and I got it to turn off. And I walked downstairs with it, and, Jamie was waiting for me. And I was like, I don't know, it wasn't even plugged in. And I'm pretty sure I just went to bed after that. But when I woke up, I was like...
Yeah, I was like, what are you talking about? It's, got to be the battery.
Yeah.
So I flip it over, and the battery's completely corroded.
Yeah, like it is.
There's nothing coming from that battery. It had that alarm clock had not even been used in at least 5 years.
Yeah.
5 years. And I went through, it was flashing 12. No, it wasn't flashing anything. When I plugged it in, it was flashing 12 because it was completely dead. And then the alarm was set for midnight because there was no way to plug it. It wasn't set for 6 a.m.
Yeah, just its default.
Yeah, it was set for the default, which was midnight. So if it had been set, it would have gone off at midnight. Or possibly once in the past 5 years.
Yeah, at no point before that had it just gone off.
Yeah, so that was kind of...
It's pretty creepy.
It was kind of creepy. Yeah, that was really creepy.
Yeah.
So, with all of this stuff that you kind of used to it, you get kind of used to it, hearing stuff and just being like, I
mean, yeah, it being me at the time, I mean, the only house I lived in until I was, the only house I lived in, but until I was, 15 or 16. I mean, you got used to it, it wasn't a big deal.
Right.
You just were kind of like, oh, okay.
Sometimes you wouldn't want to be there by yourself.
Yeah.
That happened too. But, so there is a local psychic that a lot of Funimation people have visited. And he's great. He's actually a really cool guy too, and great actor. But he does psychic readings, and based on my experience and a lot of my friends' experience, especially when it comes to people who have crossed over, as they say, he nails it. It's eerie how particular he is with stuff like that. And so, it's specific. It's not like a mild, I sense an older woman. Oh, it's my grandma. Whoop-de-doo, No, it's
that's
very,
who it is.
like,
it's your grandma.
Names and ages and stuff like that. So my mom went to go see him. It was a birthday present for her or something like that. And I had been, and she was dying to go. And so she goes in, and immediately he's like, who's Fran or Franny or like Francine? It's a name like that. And my mom says, I don't know, because we don't have anybody in that name in our family. So they go, he's like, well, I'm sure it'll come to you later. This person's around you, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. And they go through their entire reading. And at the end, he asked if she had any questions. And she's like, yeah, my house. And he actually records the sessions so you can listen to them later. And we listened to hers. And she's like, yeah, my house. And he said, that's where Franny is. She's in your house. She's upstairs.
Oh.
And Mom was like, that's where everything happens, is upstairs. He's like, yeah, she was attracted to your house because the house that she had when she lived over in your area, which, you know, who knows what that is. But she had a house with a very large upstairs. And so she was attracted to my mom's house, to our house, because it had that huge upstairs. And she died as an older woman, but he said she was... shows herself as like in her early 30s, which was when she threw the most parties and, you know, would have all of these parties upstairs. So, you know, take with that what you will. But he also asked about our attic window that was upstairs too. Which we don't have a window. And my mom said that. She's like, we don't have a window. And he said, well, it's real small. It's a real small window, just enough for someone to look out of. And she said, well, okay, that's a hole. Yeah,
it's not really even, there's no glass there. Some birds or like
a hawk committed suicide and flew into the house. And so he didn't see it. And so there's a hole from where the hawk flew into the attic.
I mean, now for years, it's been like for the longest time.
Just this little hole that's probably like a softball could probably fit out of it.
Yeah.
Real tiny. And, you know, it took a minute for my mom to remember it because she forgot about it. And she's like, oh yeah, there's, you know, this little hole. And he said that Fran goes to the hole and looks for passing spirits that are passing by and tries to get their attention. And she will call them over to the house, and then they have a party upstairs.
Well, that's very nice of her.
Right, sweet. You know, I appreciate that she's trying to meet others.
Yeah.
But I don't know, she's inviting into the house. That ain't right, yo. So anyway, that was kind of creepy. And now my mom's like, well, at least I have a name I can at least call.
Yeah.
Franny. And so she does that. She'll say, Franny, stop it. Or, how you doing, Franny? Now that she's at the house. But, you know, we all kind of had an idea that it was a feminine spirit or energy or whatever the crap you want to call it. Anyway, so it was kind of interesting to hear that. Whether it's true or not, he did know quite a bit about the layout of the house without hearing it. And
without knowing.
Without knowing we had a huge room upstairs. So that was kind of interesting. And then, you know, it explains the parties and the voices, because it would be, it sounds like there's 15 people up there.
And you would, sometimes in that house you hear your voice, like you'd hear your name called, like softly behind you, and you turn around thinking someone was, you know, at the door, at your room door. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I thought there was someone, you know, while I was upstairs, I thought there was someone downstairs calling to me. Yeah. So I'd go down and...
That's probably just common sense.
Probably.
Yeah. Get down from there! So that, you know, it took us a little bit to figure out what we wanted to tell, because we have several stories, I guess, we have a sensitive family, as they say, which made it awesome growing up with my mom's stories. We always had the best stories at parties.
Yeah, no, I got, people stopped inviting me to birthday parties because the parents got angry.
Because the kids would have nightmares.
Well...
Sometimes it's got to happen.
Shouldn't be tools.
So anyway, but this is just a basic. We both, you know, experienced it. And what?
And when I was younger, and I saw.
Oh right, yeah.
Yeah, when I was younger, I was in the house by myself, and I was talking to my dad on the phone. I was in the kitchen, and I turned around talking to him, and I saw a figure running through the middle of our living room. And out back into the hallway, and I dropped the phone, and for a second I was just like, oh my god, and I picked up the phone and I was like, Dad, I just saw someone they were looking at me and they were running by, and it seemed like they had long hair, and they ran by and they were smiling, and that's all. It was so creepy, and I was so weirded out, and I picked up the phone and I was like, I just saw someone run through the house. He was like, okay, well, you know, bring in the dogs, let them go, and if there's something, you know, they'll let you know if there's someone in the house, you know, they'll freak out and they'll bark, and, cause when you brought guests over, they'd do that, and so I let them out, and they went through the house, and, you know, everything was fine, and that was that, and I didn't think about it until other stuff later that is the direction you would go towards the upstairs. If you were downstairs, you would go into that hallway and then up the stairs.
Yeah.
and it was very creepy, right?
Yeah, I forgot about that. I'm so glad I haven't ever seen anything that specific. I'd wet myself. I wouldn't just drop a phone.
Wow.
It's intense.
That's truthful, honest.
And honest.
People like that.
Oh, good. I hope so.
And don't you worry, we have more from Jean-Luc Hester and Jimmy Marchi coming up. Now, let's get a little bit of history. You might be a little surprised at what Tatum really liked to dress up as a kid.
Well, this is really funny. When I was a child, before I developed my debilitating fear of clowns, I actually dressed up as a clown often on Halloween because I wasn't afraid of them then, but I was afraid of everything else. So I didn't ever want to go as a vampire or Dracula or Frankenstein's monster or the mummy because those things terrified me when I was really little, but I would always go as a clown. And the irony is now I can look back on childhood pictures of me in a clown outfit and I'm just as scared of that as I ever was of mummies or vampires or Frankenstein's monster.
Nerd. Oh, man. It's weird, isn't it? Like this clown fixation as a child, and now, we can't even take him to a haunted house without worrying about if we have to get the cops involved. Just funny is all I'm saying. All right, well, let's see. We actually have a very special treat for you guys. We have coming live from his home studio, Mr. Todd Haberkorn. Oh, I'm sorry, he's already started. Let's tune in.
Shooting films and stuff. So I went to class one day, and they were talking about a field trip that we were going to take to kind of immerse ourselves in this kind of Santeria stuff we were studying. Santeria doesn't mean the studies of Satan, it means the studying of saints. So they have different kinds of witch doctors within this, I guess you could call them, that with the drinking of the booze and the spraying it and the cigar smoking, those are different entities that these witches or these priestesses or priests embody to, and these spirits come into them, and these spirits, their attributes are that they smoke the cigar, that they spit the booze, things like that. So we were able to get in to see this very what would normally be closed off to the modern world kind of exorcism, I guess you could call it. And so we a handful of us got to go with, we had to get clearance with them, and we had to go interview with them and stuff, just really quick interviews that were done after class and stuff. And so me and my buddies and a couple other people got to go. So we go, and we have to be very, very quiet. We have to sit in the back. We can't say anything. It's just really fly on the wall stuff. And so the natives, I guess, or the people that attend this ceremony were there. And the family brought in it was a little girl who had been, I guess, been possessed or something like that. And it wasn't really like the movies, like you see in the movies where it's just a lot of, spraying of pea soup, vomit, and things like that. But they're very animalistic, and they're very, they're almost dangerous, it seems. Like she had a lot of marks on herself, and like the mom had bruises on her, like a bruise on an eye, and the little brother had like clumps of hair missing and things like that. So they come in, and it's a long ceremony. Like it starts in the morning and it goes all flippin' day. So it's not a 2-hour movie. It's an all-day process. And so the witch doctor is like in this trance state. So other people are prepping the little girl on the table, and they're putting like, little shrine things around it and bones and stuff like that. And so the witch doctor's in this trance state, and her eyes are in the back of her head, and she's got the booze and the cigar, just like we read about. And so they take this goat, and I guess the animal blood is, it's like a sacrifice. They cut this goat's throat, and they spray the blood all over this little girl, and they make sure it gets in her mouth, and then it covers her skin and kind of comes inside of her, I guess. And they toss the goat carcass aside. And the witch doctor, when they finish that, the witch doctor is, I guess, possessed herself, I suppose, but she starts to... Hello? Anyway, she starts to do these dances and like contort her body and stuff, and the little girl is responding to this. I mean, she's contorting and convulsing, and these noises are coming out of her. And the witch doctor's doing this dance and spraying her with booze and like blowing the smoke from the cigar in her mouth and holding her mouth shut and plugging her nose and kind of, I guess, smoking out the demon, yelling, and the people around are like getting absorbed by this energy, and they're holding their hands up and they're shaking, and everybody's kind of getting into it, and we're just kind of back there like, what the hell is going on? And so we one thing that I saw, I'm mesmerized by this, but at the same time I'm kind of looking around and I see this hold on. Hello? Whoa! Okay. I'm sorry. Lights are out.
Oh, God. I'm bleeding.
Diana, here we should that's the name of his nightring stuff. Gonna bring yourself here. When y'all groups of the name of here, we
Ow, what the fuck? Todd? Todd Haberkorn! Apparently we've lost Todd. I keep telling him to get better equipment. It's crazy. All right, let's forget about Todd, I guess. Moving on, we have the loveliness that is Tia Ballard.
When I was little, I was very close to my grandfather, my granddaddy. And we were not related by blood. We were related by marriage. And he was my best friend. I was his world and he was my world. We did everything together. We were just best friends. And because of a marriage dispute, he and I didn't get to see each other anymore. So that was, it was before Toy Story came out. So I was like 8. Yeah, it was 8. And we couldn't see each other anymore. And people tell me that it really killed him. And a few years later, he died, and he just withered away because he couldn't see me because we were so close. And I remember at that time in my life, it was a very difficult time for me. I was going through a lot. My own parents were divorced, and it was just very hard on the both of us. And when he passed away, he had given me some things in his will, but his family actually went in and changed the will, so I didn't get anything to remember my granddaddy by except a few pictures, and most of those were of me sitting around in his house. So it was a very difficult time. And I recall so many nights I would cry myself to sleep thinking of him, missing him, and regretting things. Regretting maybe I didn't try as hard to see him as I should have. Of course, at 10 years old, what can you do? But that young, I didn't know how to deal with it, you know? I remember one day I was sitting on the couch just thinking about him. And suddenly I was overwhelmed with this emotion. And I started crying. And then suddenly I felt happy, relieved. And I had this sensation that someone was watching me. We have a hallway right next to our couch, so I felt like someone was watching me from the hallway. You know that feeling you get when you could just kind of feel eyes on you, even if no one's there, you just feel that. Well, that's how I felt, and I looked down the hallway, and there was nothing there, of course, but I felt it. And I stared and stared, and there was nothing, but something pulled me up, a sensation wanting me to go into that hallway. So I did, and there were tears streaking down my face, of course, and I get to the hallway, and I stand there, and it's cold. There's a certain spot in this hallway that's cold, and it makes my hair stand up on end and goosebumps rise, and to this day, I don't understand it. It's so crazy, but it felt as if this wonderful thing that was looking at me, filling me with so much joy, was there, and I was standing in the middle of it like a pool of water or something, just that cold, chilled feeling. And I knew it was my granddaddy. I knew it because of how I felt on the inside. Sometimes you don't see things, and you don't know what's going on in your life, but you understand from the inside out. And that's what was happening to me. And it just relieved me to be near him. And all at once, I was overwhelmed with this sense of joy and happiness at being near him again. And I remember saying, "Oh, Granddaddy." And all of a sudden, I was lifted up to the tips of my toes. I felt weightless. And on my hip, I felt this cold, cold chill, almost like fingers stroking on my waist. And one of my hands felt chill, as if someone was holding my hand. And suddenly, in the middle of that hallway, I started to dance and to sway. And not like a weird pop dance or anything like that, but a slow, just relaxing dance, swaying. And I felt like my granddaddy was actually dancing with me right there in the middle of the hallway. And tears started to come, of course, and before they would pour to my cheeks, they would pour out of my eyes, and I felt them brush across my cheeks up to my ears, almost like someone was stroking them away. They didn't actually roll down, they rolled back. I never told anyone this before, so it's kind of getting me a little emotional. In that moment, I felt so safe and so happy, and I knew that everything was okay, that he was watching over me, he was in a better place, and I didn't have to worry anymore because there was nothing keeping us apart. Just as quickly as the dance started, we stopped, and the coldness went away, and I was back on my feet again, and my knees buckled, and I kind of slipped to the floor with just bawling my eyes out, of course. But I felt so good after that moment. And every so often, I'll get that feeling. Maybe I'm laying in bed, or maybe I'm just sitting somewhere not feeling too good, and I'll feel eyes on me. I'll feel my granddaddy watching me, just letting me know everything's all right. No need to worry. Has that ever happened to you?
Okay, you remember, I'm sure if you've listened to TAS more than a couple of times, I'm sure you know that I badger the crap out of you guys to submit questions, stories, whatever the upcoming show needs. I'm making sure to harass the crap out of the Facebook fans and anyone who might email us. Now, we received a lot of story submissions from you guys. Everything from first-hand accounts to frickin', script treatments. It was all amazingly great. But I want to let you guys know that a lot of people had to back out last second due to prior engagements, stuff like that, stuff they forgot, or emergencies. A lot of stuff came up. So unfortunately, as many stories as we got, we aren't actually able to read that many. A lot of people also had personal accounts that they really felt they wanted to get out there in the open. But again, we really appreciate it. I love you guys for sending that stuff. Keep sending us as much as you want, that animeshow@gmail.com. Now, with that being said, this is the first fan story I believe we're reading during our Halloween special, and it's being read by Tatum.
All right, this story comes from longtime listener and beloved fan, Canadian Cheryl. We like to call her Canadian Cheryl. And it's rather creepy, so let's give it a crack. When I was 7, I went to visit my grandmother on the Indian reservation that she was living on at the time. On the drive there, the car I was in passed by an old building that looked like it should be called Landmarks That Show the Beginnings of Canada. But the structure looked forgotten and neglected, and above all else, eerie. Of course, the timing of my arrival was bad, as my grandmother was driving me there at night, which gave the building a more nightmarish look than before. Once I got to my grandma's lodging, I felt I was safe, and I was greeted by so many relatives that I had never seen before that I felt all right. But even during all of this, I was still scared of that building. After I arrived, my grandma began to show me around the lodge and talk to a few people along the way. But she stopped for a considerable amount of time talking to an elderly woman as we were going back to our room. Being only 7 at the time, I wandered around the lobby and sat on fur pillows in the smudge room, the place where they burn sweetgrass to cleanse people and repel evil forces. The woman that my grandma was talking to is the chief of our band or tribe, and she was telling my grandma the history of the area. When we got to our room, I begged my grandma to tell me what she knew about the building I had seen on the way here. Her face was grim, and she told me what the woman had just told her. Back in the early days of when it was built, it was a place where pregnant native women had stayed. It was run by nuns whose only purpose there was to civilize the native women and prevent the birth of half-white, half-native babies. When the women were there, they were subject to harsh living conditions. When they refused to speak English or tried to run back home to the reservation, they were beaten. After the women gave birth to their children, the nuns took the newborns away and tried to differentiate the ones that were fully native from the ones that were mixed. The ones that were mixed were murdered, and their bodies were buried in the basement to prevent the mothers from knowing. When the other babies were returned, the mothers who didn't get their children back were told that their babies had died in childbirth. After those who had heard this terrible news, women got angry at the nuns and attacked them, and others killed themselves out of grief. When the church heard about what had happened, they stripped the nuns of their title, let the women leave the place, and the building was no longer allowed to be used. Ever since, my grandma had told me that during her stay, she would hear crying outside her window at night. My grandma also said that is why she was talking to the chief and asked about the crying she had heard. The chief said that the crying is the women who are mourning the loss of their babies and will keep doing so until they get them back. The chief also said that the lodge does a weekly smudging ceremony to prevent the ghosts of the mothers from entering the lodge, but it does not stop them from crying. During my stay there, I heard the crying, and my grandma knew that I did. To make me feel better, she turned on the radio, the lights, and the TV to help me not hear it, but I still did, though I didn't tell her. Recently, when I was going through my old stuff, I found my Bible, and in it I found a picture of me and the chief, and I still remember that place, and I remember the crying I heard.
That story really did. I mean, it's insane. I actually ended up reading quite a lot after Tatum read that story. Thank you so much for submitting that, Cheryl. It's amazing and terrifying at the same time. Not only, the paranormal aspect to it, but just the history behind it. It saddens me so, but thank you again for submitting that. You rock my socks. Up next, a couple of goofballs that love to play off one another.
Axe Murder Hollow.
A Pennsylvania ghost story told by Stephanie Young-Brehm and
David L. Brehm.
Okay, you don't have to use the scary voice the whole time.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Susan and Ned were driving through a wooded, empty section of highway. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, the sky went dark in the torrential downpour. We better stop, said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake, and suddenly the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the road and slid to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Nice. You're welcome. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was all right. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows and said,
I'm going to see how bad it is.
She saw his blurry figure in the headlight, walked around the front of the car. A moment later, he jumped in beside her, soaking wet.
The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel deep in mud. I'm going to have to go for help.
Susan swallowed nervously. There would be no quick rescue here. He told her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. Axe Murder Hollow. Although Ned hadn't said the name aloud until now, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the car. This was the place where a man had once taken an axe and hacked his wife to death in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Supposedly, the axe-wielding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of the road.
Whoa.
Outside the car, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise. What, in a shriek? But she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down into her seat. She sat in silence for a while, and then she noticed another sound. Bump, bump, bump. It was a soft sound.
Not that soft.
Soft enough, like something being blown by the wind. Sorry. Keep going. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light. An official-sounding voice told her to get out of the car.
Get out of the car.
Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it. Hanging by his feet from the tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned.
What, I'm dead now?
Yeah, you're out of the series. Sucks. His bloody throat had been cut so deeply he was nearly decapitated. The wind swung his corpse back and forth so that it thumped against the tree. Here, you can do the sound.
Bump. Bump. Bump.
Nice commitment. Susan screamed and ran toward... That's me. Susan screamed and ran toward the voice and the light. As she drew close, she realized the light was not coming from a flashlight. Standing there was the glowing figure of a man with a smile on his face and a large, solid, and definitely real axe in his hands.
Well.
Don't even. She backed away from the glowing figure until she bumped into the car.
Bump. Playing around when my back was turned. Are you, my pretty?
The ghost pirate whispered, stroking the sharp blade of the axe with his fingers.
You've been very naughty. Very naughty. Very naughty.
Oh, man. Where's my line? Okay. The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe blade in the eerie, incandescent light.
You've been very naughty.
Stop it.
Naughty. Naughty.
Happy Halloween, guys.
Like I said, goofballs. I love those two. Up next, we have a little more from Jamie Marchi and Monsieur Jean-Luc Hester.
So we're back with more ghost stories, yay! Or here for the first time, depending upon how things are edited.
I hope that woohoo did not peak.
You have a cute pop screen. Of course it didn't. So we decided we would tell one of our mother's stories. Jean-Luc.
Mm-hmm. Which one should we...
Let's talk about her house when she grew up.
In West Virginia on the Army.
Born and raised.
Yep.
Not really. She wasn't born.
She was not.
My grandfather was in the Air Force. He retired as a lieutenant colonel because he didn't want to go to, where was it? Iceland. And that's where he would have been a colonel. So he retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force. And so they lived in Oklahoma. But they traveled a lot. My mother was literally baptized in the Mediterranean. When
lucky
she was 13.
lady.
So they lived in France, they lived in Greece, they lived in Montana, they lived in all over the place. And at one point, I think when she was in high school, they were in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And they lived, because he was a officer, I don't know who else in the military, but because he's an officer, they usually have nice houses. So he was in a nicer house that hadn't been occupied for a while. And my grandfather he's like, well, we'll take that one. It's pretty no nonsense.
Yeah.
Although very nonsense at the same time because he's very funny. So they lived there and they had typical haunting things.
Classic like people walking through the hallways, they'd hear footsteps
or cold spots that would move around. It was a 2-story house with a basement.
Yes.
And the consensus from both my grandmother and my mother is that the basement was terrifying.
Yeah, that's that, and that's where the cold spot often was.
Yes.
But it would move around apparently.
Yeah, and the dog would either walk around. They had a little, was it a Scotty dog? It was a poodle. It was a toy poodle. And it would walk around. Corky was its name. I never met Corky, but
we were far too young.
Yeah, plenty of stories about him. So he would run around the house looking up at something, like he was following someone or running to someone, but there would not be anybody there. Until
it would get downstairs where the cold spot was. And every time I remember Mom talking about how the cold spot would move. and how the dog he wouldn't go near it. Didn't matter where the cold spot was, the dog wouldn't go near it. He'd walk around it. Sometimes he'd growl a little. He did not appreciate whatever was making the area cold.
And he would also not go into the basement.
Yeah.
And he would growl and bark at the door to the basement. Almost as if he was, like, I guess, if a dog's blocking an entrance and saying, you can't come through here, pay the toll. I'm sure it was very adorable. My grandmother told a story once about being in the basement, and she always had a bad feeling when she was in there, and it just made her hair stand on end to go down there. But my grandmother will be damned if anything's going to tell her what she can and can't do. And she would say that. I'll be damned if you're going to tell me what I can and can't do. So she decided she was going to go downstairs and do some laundry because the washer and dryer were downstairs. So she was got her laundry, went downstairs, and put her stuff in the washing machine. And she went back upstairs, and she said, when she was down there, she felt the same thing she always feels, like different air pressure, and that someone was there watching her.
And they always talked about it in a very negative way.
Very negative.
Like whatever was downstairs was very negative.
Yeah, just bad, really bad, and terrifying. And normally that's as far as she got. She would put her stuff in the washer, nobody else would be home, and she wouldn't go back downstairs into the basement until everybody was home. So, but she said, nope, I'm going to do my laundry, I'm going to get it done. So she went downstairs and put her stuff in the dryer and waited until it finished drying. Would not go back upstairs. And I think it's because she thought if she went back upstairs, she wouldn't come back down to get it. But she sat there and waited and said she could feel someone breathing on her neck the entire time she was there. And she just stood rigid. And when everything got out, she very calmly took it out and she folded it up downstairs, feeling someone breathing on her neck the entire time, folded everything, took her basket, and went upstairs very slowly and calmly and shut the door and never went back in the basement without anybody else being there ever again.
At any point.
Never even went into the basement unless somebody was at the house. So, and hearing her tell that story.
I mean, and the way they talk, I mean, at the time they weren't always, they didn't feel like they could tell, our grandfather, because I mean, it was the 60s, 70s and they were in the military.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I mean, it's not something, what's he going to do? Tell,
we need
his
to
commanding
move, our
officer?
house is haunted.
Yeah. That it's haunted? No, but.
Yeah. I flew missions in World War II, but there's a ghost in my house.
Can we move it? Yeah.
Yeah, so they never really talked to him about it, and he didn't want to hear about it, is the idea we got. But funny story, we were talking about the house one day, and my grandpa walked in, and my mother and my grandmother both just shut up. And he's like, what are you guys talking about?
Yeah.
And I was like, we were talking about that old house, or that house that you lived in West Virginia and all the weird stuff that happened there. And he said, oh, yeah, that house was haunted.
It was so great. He didn't miss a beat. like
my mom and my grandpa were like, what? We never said anything to you. And he was like, well, I mean, you didn't have to. It was haunted. Yeah. It was really funny. My uncle also, my mother had two brothers, 6 years older, one 6 years younger. So the older one was already out of the house. Yeah. But the younger one was still there, and he had a story. He
had an experience he told me about in that house, that when he was, he was, I guess, 11 around this time?
Probably, yeah.
He said he had it one night while he was in the house, not too long after they moved there. He had a horrible nightmare that there were, someone was trying to smother him with newspapers. He couldn't breathe, and there were newspapers all over him, like someone was holding them down all over his face and trying to smother them. And the next morning when he woke up, there were newspapers scattered across his bedroom.
Creepy.
Yeah, I remember him. And when he told me his eyes kind of watered a little bit, and you could tell that you could tell that he it scared him, and that, I mean, everyone who lived there at the time had
something happen. My mom's is probably the most intense story. And I would say my mother was probably the most sensitive person in our family, also. So, thank God it's not me.
I don't need to see that shit.
No way. So it's the same story of the basement, and my mom apparently had a breakfast date and then a lunch date. So she had to put some clothes into the dryer that she set in the wash, and then when she got back, she was going to throw them into the dryer real quick and then go get ready for the other date. So she ran downstairs, and she was in kind of a hurry, threw the stuff into the dryer, and ran back up the stairs to go get ready, and of the basement. And while she was running, she felt someone grab her ankle and pull her leg from underneath her, and she fell down. And she thought someone was in the house with her,
downstairs with her.
Yeah, she crawled up the stairs. She said she hit when she landed, she just hit it running. She was scrambling because someone was behind her and going to get her. So she scrambled up the stairs, took off running through the kitchen, around through the living room, and up the stairs to the second floor, which had a landing that turned. And at the landing, she's like, "This is stupid."
Yeah, I must have tripped. I'm being silly. I'm freaking myself out.
Yeah. So she turns around, and meanwhile, the dog had been upstairs and had come running to see, what all the commotion was. She turns around on the landing at the same time the dog gets there, and the dog starts barking behind her.
Yeah, freaking out.
And she turns around, and this is how she says, this is the way she describes it. She's like, "I'm not going to say it was a ghost or a spirit because I don't know what it was. I'll just tell you what it looked like. What I saw, what could have been a slave, white, see-through, and had red eyes and was coming at me. And it stopped and then just faded away."
Yeah, no, and I remember her telling me, she said, when she said, she got there and she thought she was crazy when she saw it. She thought, I'm losing my mind, but she said the thing that at the time made her think maybe I'm not, is that the dog she said the dog looked at her, then looked past her, and started freaking out. Started barking and growling, and, it would, and she said that when she saw it, and when that happened, and it stopped, and the way she described it, she said it's not like it stepped back down the stairs, it just went straight back, straight backwards, and faded.
Yeah.
Straight off of the stairwell in which it was on. Yeah.
And this is a house that was owned, I cannot remember, someone in the Confederate Army owned the house, and initially, or had lived there when they were on base, something. I can't remember.
I remember her telling me there was a piece.
It wasn't West Virginia, it was regular Virginia.
It was regular Virginia?
Yeah, it was regular Virginia. I just went to West Virginia. That's probably why it got confusing.
Well, I remember her. They also said that there was a piece of like a chest of drawers or something that was in the basement that was just really old and was there when they got there, and they left it there with a date carved into it.
Yeah.
And she didn't remember the date, but she said it was just down there where the cold spot was, and was always it was there since they got there.
Yeah. And I guess about 10 years ago, they were on base for some reason, visiting friends or something, and they decided to drive by the house and take a picture of it, so that, because all this time we'd heard these epic stories about this house, so they wanted to take a picture to show us, and, telling us about it, it was vacant. Nobody lived there, and they had a waiting list on base to move in, so apparently they just stopped
putting people in that house.
And my grandmother's telling me the story while I'm looking at the picture, and I'm like, "What are you talking about? Somebody's in this house looking out the window." And in the picture, you can see somebody looking out the window, but the house was vacant. So that is. I'm so glad that didn't happen to me.
Yeah, no, that's different generation.
Yeah.
Take that, baby boomers.
That is one of my mother's stories that used to frighten my brother's friends when he would tell them when he was a kid.
No, it is a good one though.
It is.
I was won. Not that it was competition, but I totally won.
Yeah. I was having a sleepover once. My friends, this was in high school, and we were telling ghost stories, and my grandmother came out to tell the story of the house. And so the scene, she was telling everything, and it was very spooky and quiet. And the lights that they have in the living room are set on timers to go off at midnight. So as she's building up the story of sitting there and someone's breathing down her neck and she can feel it, but nobody's there, and she finishes her laundry and starts to go up the stairs, it hit midnight. So all of the lights went off as their clock, they have like a small grandfather clock, started chiming midnight. Those girls freaked out. And my grandmother and I started laughing so hard we couldn't even tell him what happened. And my grandfather came out and he was like, "What's going on?" That was really funny. So anyway, sorry. That's, another.
It's a good story.
Funny story. We like telling ghost stories. Runs in the family.
I love those too. It's really cool to hear little stories, and I've heard a lot of Jamie's. It's really cool that she got Jean-Luc involved on the fun that is that anime show's Halloween special. Okay, up next we have another story from Mr. Stephen Hoff.
This second story happens roughly around when I was in high school, about to graduate high school, or shortly after high school, and I can't remember. But out in Acton, there was this old, they used to call it, I don't know if it was an insane asylum, but all the kids around called it the old insane asylum, and all it was is just a burned down basement, wide open. So you'd go up to the basement and look down, and it'd probably be about 20 feet of concrete down below that you'd just walk into and everything, and people would say, there's this big insane asylum. I haven't done any research, so I don't know how true that is. But it's owned by some like Eagle Scouts or some kind of Boy Scout association. So being on there, you were, automatically trespassing, but nobody really cared. It was just kind of a party ground for high school kids. And a lot of weird things would happen out there. You'd see weird burns in the concrete, I guess from fires. You'd see weird markings and stuff. Anytime you'd camp out there, you'd hear screams in the woods, just crying, people laughing and stuff. And there wouldn't be anybody else around. And we'd always go out and around and investigate, because being high school kids, you're automatically invincible against anything. So one of the strange incidences that happened was we a group of friends of mine, and the girl that I was dating at the time, we went out there to go and hang out and have some shenanigans. And we get out there, and my spidey sense is already tingling. I'm kind of, when it comes to ghosts and everything, I can kind of tell when something's going on. My skin kind of starts vibrating. And I was walking around, and I could kind of know who was around at that time and know their names. And this one, I guess, crazy person or whatever was around, told me that her name was Mary. So just kind of played along with it, thinking that it was part of my imagination at the time. And, didn't think anything of it. And later that night, we, get into my friend's house and start and just kind of hang out. And, my friends are off in one room, and I'm hanging out with the girl that I was dating at the time. And she just got kind of weird and started going off about how she knew that I was the one and everything, and that she then identified herself as Mary, and that she took over the girl that I was dating, her body, to talk to me about trying to stay in that body. That kind of freaked me out. I don't know if it was just her being crazy or me being crazy. I don't know, but was kind of weird, kind of odd at the time. Immediately stopped dating her, by the way, because that was kind of crazy.
Well, apparently I think that worked out for the best. But then again, I have a biased opinion. All right, up next we have Jean-Luc talking about some of his favorite costumes throughout the years.
I mean, I've been I've been a Power Ranger. I've been a vampire. I've been Batman. I've been all around the world.
And
I have to say, probably my favorite costume was 2 years back. I went as one of the Golden Girls.
That's right.
I was supposed to go as someone who had died.
A famous person.
Person who had died.
That's right.
And I went as what was her name? The oldest one.
Rose.
I went as Rose.
No, Rose.
No,
Rose
yeah.
is the one is Betty White.
Yeah, Betty White's still alive.
Looks so much like our grandmother. It is not even funny. They could be the same person, except, well.
But they're not. That would be crazy.
Yeah.
I mean.
But they look so much alike.
But that'd be awesome if we were.
It was Sophia.
Yes, I went as Sophia. Wig and dress and everything.
SAS shoes.
Yeah.
Heel.
Classic.
Yeah.
Classic.
I did your makeup. I remember that.
You did. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand the appeal of dressing like Sophia from the Golden Girls, but not judging. I mean, I've dressed as some pretty crazy stuff over the years. I mean, nothing like that, Jean-Luc, but I mean, pretty awesome. Okay, up next we have Tatum telling another one of his stories.
Another story I'm fond of telling, even though it's technically not my story, happened around Halloween, actually, when I was a teenager. A friend of mine, who for the purposes of this story shall be called Dave, had this really cool, his parents anyway, I should say, had this really awesome, big, 2-story house, sort of on the fringe of town that was the party pad. I mean, if there was a party going on among our group of friends, it was almost always going on out at Dave's house. And he decided to go all out one year and do this really big Halloween party, which was awesome. We all showed up in costume. We all, got into it. It was really fun. And by the end of the night, because we were all into ghost stories and that kind of stuff, so it wasn't really like a big dancing party or that kind of stuff. We all just, we love to freak each other out and play pranks and things like that. So by the end of the night, or by the time the party was wearing down, the few of us, say a dozen or so of us that were left, had gone upstairs into Dave's room to tell ghost stories. And, we had all the lights were off, and we had this candle, and we would pass the candle, lit candle back and forth. So whoever was telling their story at the time was holding the candle. That was the rule. Well, Dave's dad had gotten around to telling a story, and his dad was a great storyteller. He would do voices and just take his time and just make sure that to scare the hell out of all of us. And he was telling the story of the Hook, a great old urban legend that everyone knows. And he was getting to the part in the story where, the girl in the car is hearing the Hook scrape on the side of the door, and she's all alone out in the woods waiting for her boyfriend to come back and blah, 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 blah. We all knew the story backwards and forwards, but to hear Dave's dad tell it, you'd think we were this is the first time we'd ever heard it. And I don't know how he arranged it, but he did. And this is really, really funny. The window of Dave's bedroom looked down from the second floor on their front lawn. Dave's brother, who's significantly older than he, and a group of his friends were on the lawn, and at the time, and I don't know how they communicated with each other with Dave's dad, but just as he was making the scratching noise in the story, they had turned on downstairs. They had turned on the water hose in the front yard and splashed it up against the window, which of course scared the bejesus out of all of us. And then the next thing we know, we hear the doorbell just ringing just constantly, and we rush out into onto the stairwell and onto the landing, looking down, which looks straight down the stairs to the front door, and we all see the door burst open, and in tumbles 4 or 5 guys, all in black and really, really horrendous looking, creature masks and stuff, and bottles of crazy spray, and they're all shouting, "Trick or treat!" and running around in the house. And it's, by this time, it's clear to all of us that this is Dave's brother and his cronies doing this to us. So we all, we grab pillows and other stuff, and we just kind of go down, and this big, just fun, ridiculous Halloween melee ensues in this dark house in the middle of the night on Halloween. Well, maybe 15, 20 minutes later, we'd all stopped and we're cooling off and, panting and just sort of, "Oh man, you got me. Oh, you got us." And we had sort of cornered off in the kitchen and turned some lights on, and we're, having, snacks and drinking some Kool-Aid, because we were not the cool kids. And, we looked around us, and after a few minutes, we realized that one of our group, this girl who I shall call Becky, it's not her real name, had been part of the group. She'd been dressed like this really cool ghost. She had pale makeup on, was wearing all white, and had her hair all done up, all creepy and everything. Really, really fabulous costume. But she was nowhere to be seen. The last time any of us could remember seeing her was right before the melee ensued. So we thought, oh, that's what she's doing. Becky's hiding somewhere, and she's going to spring out and try to scare us. So, not to be one-upped, we decided, well, we'd all turn out the lights in the house and started creeping through the house, like calling her name, "Becky, Becky." And this went on for a little while until finally somebody somewhere found her and then came rushing into the living room and told all of us to stop and turn all the lights on, and we needed to just, calm down. And things got really deadly serious, and we didn't understand why. Well, Dave's mom and his parents and all that, had brought Becky into the room. Apparently she'd been found in a closet upstairs and was just shivering and speechless. She was so frightened. And we all felt bad. We thought we had just scared her in general, that she didn't know what was going on and just had hidden away and didn't realize this was all just a joke, So we felt kind of bad. And she was so out of sorts that she insisted on having her parents come and pick her up. So we were all kind of waiting there, and kind of like, "Oh, we're really, really sorry." And she looked around at us, and I think some of the first words she said to any of us was, "Where's the one with the crazy like skeleton mask and the hair?" And we all kind of looked around us, and there was no one in our group or with Dave's brother's friends who was wearing that kind of mask. They all had Frankenstein monsters masks or Dracula or things like that, but no one had a skeleton or like a skull face with wild, crazy hair. And when this became clear to her that we didn't know who she was talking about, she just started just screaming. I mean, she was just inconsolable, and we didn't know what was wrong with her. We thought, oh my God, oh my God. Well, her parents came and got her, took her home. She refused ever to come back to Dave's house after that, though she and Dave remained friends, but she would not ever go back out to his house after that. And finally, we got the story out of her that still gives me chills to this day. And I believe it because I knew this girl very, very well. And she wasn't faking being as afraid as she was that night. You could really, really tell she was genuinely on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And the story she eventually told all of us about what she'd seen was apparently shortly after the doorbell had been ringing and everyone, Dave's brother's friends burst in with their crazy spray and yelling trick or treat and all that, and we all went down into the living room to join them. She had been at the top of the stairs, which, if you remember, looked right down the staircase to the front door. And the front door had remained open for a little while, until someone had the presence of mind to shut it. And she said she was just kind of standing there on the stairs looking at this open front door. And after everyone else had kind of moved out of view, she noticed someone else come up to the door. Tall, kind of willowy person, she said, and from the neck down, they were wearing what looked like, just a ghost outfit, like a more properly, I guess, a death shroud. You couldn't see arms or legs or anything. It was just this white drape that went all the way to the floor. But from the neck up, they had this, she described it as being a really elaborate looking, like death's head mask with flashing red eyes and a wild shock of white hair. And she said this person or this thing, whatever it was, just sort of stood there in the doorway for a little while. And she was standing where she was, just kind of froze in place. And after a moment or two, this thing turned and looked at her and noticed she was standing at the top landing of the stairs and started coming up the stairs. But she said it moved in such a bizarrely fluid motion that it didn't resemble someone going upstairs at all. It looked like someone was floating up the stairs, she said, that you couldn't see feet touching staircase or a hand touching. It was just this everything was just coming at her, just, floating basically. And it scared her bad enough that she ran and she locked herself in a closet at the end of that hallway on the second floor and stayed in there for a good hour and a half, I might add, before coming out. That's how frightened she was. And like I said, not really technically my story because I was only there for it. It didn't happen to me, but I believe it because I knew that girl and she was kind of a level-headed, no-nonsense, didn't really believe in ghosts. If pressed, she really didn't have any of her own ghost stories until that night. So I don't know. But Dave's house was definitely a weird place, and other things happened out there, of course, over the years. But, that one always stands out as being the one that probably makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up the most. So,
Awesome. We've been talking about Halloween costumes throughout the years, and I'll say that, as I've said before, not many of my costumes have been all that amazing, but I remember this one year there was this Halloween, there was a Halloween where my mom actually saved up enough money so that I could be a proper witch, have the black smock or whatever the hell it is, the hat, the makeup, which is very, very important, very key, as well as the broom and all that stuff. But the thing is, that Halloween, I was probably about 6 or 7. There was an instant where my mother promised me that she would get home in time from work to do my makeup because she knew that it was very important that the makeup was right. Well, because I kept harassing her about it. It had to be green face, mole, blah, blah, blah. And my mom ended up having to work a double shift that night. So that left my father in charge of my makeup. And my father, as much as I love him, he was he had a military background and, I was living on a military base at the time, somewhere in Texas or California. I'm not entirely sure where, I forget. But, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the makeup that comes equipped with the witch costume, but it is green, brown, black, and yellow. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the armed services, that is very similar to camouflage makeup. And being that I kept stressing to my mother and didn't really stress to my father the importance of the makeup, I ended up being fully equipped in the witch costume, broom, hat, dress, boots, everything, but in full camouflage makeup. If we hadn't lived on a military base at the time, I think my costume would have cost me some candy, but fortunately, I think I made out like a frickin' bandit because of it. So, as much as I hated that it wasn't the classic look, I think I did okay. Now we have Alexis Tipton telling a story that was submitted by Benjamin Oscar.
This little account of paranormal activity happened many years ago when I was 13 years old. I sometimes think it was all in my head, but as I got older, I really began to wonder what I did see that final night. It all started when my sister-in-law, Dawn, took me up for the week to East Greenville, Pennsylvania, to help around with her Aunt Elise's housework. Elise lived in a home that was as normal as the other houses on the block were, a little 2-story house with a couple bedrooms, a bathroom, a basement, kitchen, living room, that sort of thing. There was also a certain guest room upstairs that looked as though it remained unused for some time. It was facing the staircase as you went upstairs, so you couldn't miss it. This little room was the place I was going to stay in for the week, and while Dawn and Elise took up their own rooms down the hallway. This particular guest room that I was staying in felt as though it belonged to someone else prior because it was still decorated with a lot of someone else's belongings. I asked Elise if anyone used to live in there, and she told me it used to be her sister Marie's old bedroom. She explained to me briefly that they used to live together, but because of a huge dispute with one another, Marie packed up and left to live with a close friend miles away, completely shutting out her own sister. Marie passed away shortly after, along with a friend she stayed with, and all of her belongings were returned back to Elise, in which she decorated the guest room as best she could, the way it used to look before. She turned it into a guest room in case any company decided to stay over while still respecting that it was her sister's old room. It didn't bother me so much that I was living in a dead woman's bedroom. After all, she passed away elsewhere, so there really wasn't anything to get scared about. During the first few days, me and Dawn simply helped around with Elise since she was only capable of doing so much. Most of it was cleaning the house, like dusting off shelves and bookcases, cleaning bathrooms or rearranging furniture, boring stuff. I really wanted to go home. However, during our clean sweeps one day, I came across a ring on the floor, a golden one at that. I showed Dawn and thought it was hers, but it wasn't. We then took it to Elise and showed her. It wasn't hers either. Elise thought it could have been Marie's ring since she was the only other person who ever lived with her, but didn't really seem to care too much on whose it was. She told us that she would keep the ring for herself for safekeeping, and that was that. The same night as I slept in the guest room, I had a really strange dream. I dreamt I was outside the guest room, looking at the staircase before me, and I could see an old woman pointing her finger over and over at the end of the hallway. I didn't get a good look at her face, but I was certain she was old in the way she looked and acted, as she kept directing me to her one finger. Then the dream suddenly stopped. Crazy enough, it didn't stop with just the one night. I kept having similar dreams the rest of the week, though sometimes it wasn't at the staircase. Sometimes it was inside the same room I was in, which really started to freak me out, because I wasn't going to complain, because I was staying only one more day there, so I'd be long gone from whatever was haunting me. On the last day, after all the cleaning was done, we spent the rest of the time together, watching movies, playing board games, or just talking, really anything. I brought up the weird dreams during one of our discussions, and I was trying to have Elise give me her 2 cents on what was going on, if it could be Marie or not who I was dreaming about. Elise somewhat believed me, but thought it was probably because she told me the story of Marie, and maybe it had something to do with that, nothing more. As for the finger pointing, she didn't really have an answer for that. Dawn thought the same way and felt that I was just having a bizarre nightmare because I wasn't used to being away from home for so long. Since I never really got any answers, and since it was the last day, I was going to try something new and see if it worked or not. Yeah. Okay, cool. The final night, I snuck into Elise's bedroom before she went to sleep for the night and stole the ring from inside her bedside night table, which I found it in. I placed the ring at the end of the hallway, on the floor, near the staircase edge, the exact same spot where I saw this old woman, and wanted to see if my dreams were really trying to tell me something or not. I knew I was leaving the next day anyway, but I wanted to see this for myself. Elise never noticed the ring was missing, and so the night continued on. That night, I didn't seem to have the dream anymore. In fact, no real dream ever really came. During the middle of the night, I woke up and went to the bathroom and did my own thing. As I came out and headed back to the room, I looked for the ring just a few feet away from me and saw it was missing. I was surprised but also very sleepy, so I really couldn't think of anything else but going back to my bed at the time. As I looked at my room, I saw someone going in. I was thinking it was Elise because the clothing was that of an old woman's. Since it was really dark with the moon being the only source of light to see with, I only saw the backside of the person heading into my room until I couldn't see them anymore. I walked straight back in, turned on the light, and saw that no one was there. I looked in the closet and all around, and still no one was there. No one under the bed or behind the door, not even the window where blinds were open. I got so terribly frightened and ran to Dawn's room and woke her up to tell her what I saw. We went back together and found nothing, nor did we find any presence of another person being in there. Elise was sound asleep in her own room, which we both checked together, so it couldn't have been her. She felt it was one of my nightmares again, and so she decided to stay the rest of the night with me. The rest of the night I still didn't have the dream of the old woman pointing her finger. It was the only night since I first came there that I didn't have it. I never told Elise what I did since I didn't want to get scolded for it, and me and Dawn simply went back home to North Wales, Pennsylvania after the week was done with. I still have no idea what I saw that night. It was so creepy to think that someone could vanish like that as I saw them walking into a room, so I tend not to really bring up the story too much these days. It's just so weird. Now that I'm older, though, I actually think I might have done something good in the end, that I returned the ring to whom it truly belonged to. I really believe that it was Marie I saw that night. The old woman pointing to her finger in my dreams, the ring we found on the floor, as well as the fact that the mysterious ghostly figure only walked into my room, Marie's old bedroom. Plus, the dreams ended after the whole incident. It gave me the chills just thinking about it. However, it leaves me with a good sense that maybe ghosts are real.
Great story, Benjamin. Thank you for submitting it. And also, thank you, Alexis Tipton, for taking time out of your busy schedule to read a story from a fan. Now we have Tia Ballard telling us what she loves about Halloween.
One thing I love about Halloween is that you have an excuse to be evil. Now, I'm not talking about going around setting cats on fire, but I am talking about, you sit around and if you're watching scary movies and people walk in, normally they're like, what the crap is wrong with you? What are you watching that stuff for? You some kind of freak? Well, on Halloween, you have an excuse to do that. You can watch scary stuff, you can look up ghosts and things like that, and nobody's going to ask you anything. It's an excuse to be evil. And that is really, really awesome.
Tia, not all of us limit our evil and devilish ways to just one day a year, but, to each his own. It's whatever. Up next, we have Jamie and Jean-Luc talking about costumes.
I remember junior high, I went as like a vampire bride, and I thought that I was really cool. That was way before vampires were as popular as they are now. So.
Yeah. Back before they were lame.
Yeah, totally. Oh, I went as the Lady of the Lake once.
Oh.
I don't know if you guys know the story of the girl who stands beside a lake, and then the car comes and the people give her a ride home. She had driven into the lake and she just needed to get home, and she'd been at prom or some sort of formal, and so they drive her home, and when they get there, there's a puddle in the seat. That story originates from White Rock Lake in Dallas, Texas. That's where that story comes from. So I went to a party one year and I dressed as the Lady of the Lake.
I know people who've seen her.
Right.
Yeah, my good friend of mine, he and his brother, one Halloween thought it'd be fun to go out there. And they said they stopped paying attention and they stopped looking at the lake, and they were parked and they were talking, and they looked up, and in the rear view mirror there's a woman dressed in white. And they just drove off. They didn't take the time to see if she needed help.
Right.
They didn't give her a chance to leave a puddle. They just drove off, which was,
smart.
I mean, yeah, if you see a lady in white in the middle of the night, don't help her.
By a lake?
Yeah, by a lake, definitely.
If she's wet?
Don't help her.
No.
I mean,
she's just going to get your car wet.
I mean, not to mention if she's injured and she dies in your car, you're partly responsible for her death legally, and that's not something you want to deal with.
Yeah, whole bag of worms.
Unless they're gummy worms are good.
Right. If she has a bag of gummy worms, then by all means, pick her up. But if not, don't.
Leave that wet bitch alone.
So I went, leave that wet bitch alone. Someone quote that somewhere for something.
Quote, leave that wet bitch alone. End quote. Jean-Luc Hester, 2010. Charming, absolutely charming. Up next, keeping on the vein of costumes, let's hear a little bit about Stephen Hoff.
For me personally, I don't really know what my favorite costume would have been. I had so many as a kid, from Spider-Man to just being a ghost. I had this weird alien head that had glowing eyes mask that was fun. I really enjoyed that one. As far as other people's costumes, my brother had a plastic, it wasn't Darth Vader, but it looked very similar to Darth Vader. I think they had to change the name for copywriting issue. At the time I didn't know it. It was like Zardon or some shit like that. That was that was a really cool costume because you looked like a weird cyborg.
See, again, all these cool costumes, and, I have one in full camo. Not fair. All right. Okay, everybody, we have one more fan-submitted story. It comes from Sunny Bell, and it is being read by Tatum.
This story took place in New Orleans East, pre-Katrina. I've never really been a big believer in ghosts and haunted houses. They just seem to be a bit too far-fetched for me. A little over 5 years ago, my friends and I all went to an old abandoned crematorium. This really wasn't my idea. In fact, I thought we were going to a movie. Our group consisted of 4 guys and me being the lone girl. Originally, I wasn't even going into the place. It was surrounded by a huge fence, and the building itself was dark and creepy. I just didn't want to be left behind while they all went in. To get into the place, we had to crawl underneath the big fence and actually sneak in through a broken doorway. Thankfully, the boys brought large flashlights so we didn't break our necks on the debris that was across the floor. Nothing really seemed to be out of the ordinary, for an abandoned building anyway. The first place we went to was, of course, the cremation room. For a summer night, it was very chilly in there. Old licenses littered the floor, and gurneys were all over the place. It didn't seem as if anyone had been there in a really long time. That's when the first odd thing happened. We were all exploring the room when we heard scratching sounds coming from the furnace. Of course, we just figured that it was a mouse or something inside of it, so the leader of our group decided to look in and see. We opened the furnace and peered inside, searching for whatever was making the scratching noise. We didn't see anything, but we noticed there were scratch marks on the insides of the furnace that looked as if someone had raked their nails down it. Obviously, we were freaked out, so we decided to go to the next floor and continue exploring. The second floor is where all the really weird stuff began to happen. The second floor consisted of 3 rooms on each side of the corridor, with an elevator on the very end. We all looked in the rooms and didn't really see much. There were some old newspapers, old equipment, and broken objects on the floor. 2 of the guys and I decided we wanted to look down the elevator shaft. When we got down there, the elevator door was opened about 2 inches. We really couldn't see anything, so we all tried to pry the doors open a little more to see in. The doors just wouldn't budge. We finally gave up on trying to open the doors after about 5 minutes and started to walk back down to join the rest of the group. We were about halfway down the hallway when we heard a very loud scraping sound, followed by a crash. We shined our flashlights back to the elevator and saw that the door was opened by about a foot. We were really getting nervous at this point because we couldn't get those doors to budge. We told the rest of the group what happened and went back to the elevator to get a closer look. The building had been pretty quiet up to this point. We started to hear really odd sounds coming from both upstairs and downstairs. The sounds of shuffling and whispers echoed up the elevator shaft. Something shattered on the floor above us. By this point, I'd really had enough of that place. I was urging my friends to follow me out. They all agreed that they had seen enough as well. We began to head back to the stairwell when we heard another loud crash. Extremely freaked out, we looked back down the corridor and were shocked to see the elevator was closed all the way. As we started down the stairwell back up to the first level, we heard footsteps coming down the hallway of the second floor. All of us were accounted for, so we knew it wasn't one of our group. Thoroughly scared now, we raced back down to the first floor and ran from the building. None of us looked back until we were outside of the gates. We used our flashlights and shined the light at the windows to see what we could see, and on the 3rd floor second window we noticed a figure of a man staring out. None of us really needed any urging to leave the place after that. There was a sign on the fence that we noticed outside that said trespassers would be shot. Now, whether that figure we saw on the 3rd floor was the caretaker for that creepy place or something else, I really don't know. I know that after that night, I wouldn't rule out that there are some things that cannot be explained, like what those sounds were, or how the elevator door opened and shut when we'd been trying to open it when it was stuck. I know that was more than enough for me, though.
And that wraps up that Anime Show's Halloween special. Thank you guys so much for listening and being a part of it by submitting your stories. I know we didn't get to all of them, but again, thank you guys so much. Let's take time to, of course, thank the speakers of this show. Todd Haberkorn, Stephanie Young, David Brehm, Jamie Marchi, Jean-Luc Hester, Stephen Hoff, Tia Ballard, Alexis Tipton. You guys rock. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be a part of the show. With that being said, thanks for listening to that Anime Show. Please continue to listen. Happy Halloween. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a matter to attend to. Shut up!